He said, hey, I'm your commander, you give it to me. So we gave him his Kalashnikov. And our driver, who was now far from the car, he said, all I heard was the caulking of New York, where the hospital for special surgeries. So I've had 20 surgeries since then for different things. And Anya, but she within a year and a half, because Anya would have been crazy.
A year and a half later, you were back.
Country, but they want prosperity. And the only way to figure out how things can go forward in Afghanistan is if Afghans figure out how things can go forward in Afghanistan. But they need an international community that is in Afghanistan, not sitting in Doha, not sitting in Washington or in Beijing they need to be in Afghanistan, not telling Afghans what to do, but trying to learn a little bit and trying to understand.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Pakistan Observer podcast. मेरा नाम Abdullah Malik है और मेरे साथ आज मौजूद हैं Kathy Gannon. Kathy, thank you so much for being here and welcome to Pakistan Observer.
Thank you very much for having me.
So Kathy, as I was telling you off camera as well, done a bit of research on you, tried understanding what all Kathy does, but it seems like Kathy does it all. So in your words, tell me who Kathy Gannon is.
Well, good question. Well, Abdullah, my profession, I'm a journalist. So I've been with the Associated Press, the American news agency, in this region for over 35 years. I was the former bureau chief or the news director rather for Pakistan and Afghanistan. I'm no longer with the AP, and now I'm working on a second book. I've written one book on Afghanistan. I'm a Canadian from northern Canada, about 600 miles north of Toronto. So I grew up in a small mining town, which was wonderful. And I've traveled through the Middle East. I've traveled through Central Asia. Mostly, I guess, my area of, I hate to say expertise because I have to say I find that word, I don't know that there are that many experts in that many things, although there are a lot of people who think they are. So I certainly have covered a lot of conflict, and the gift in being able to do that has been the real gratitude, I guess, I feel for the people who I've been able to meet and been able to spend time with, because when you do in those environments and those circumstances, you really, a lot of the layers are torn away. So you have an opportunity to be able to have conversations, spend time in a very sort of real, honest way that helps you, I hope, or helped me, I hope, gain an understanding, because I'm a real firm believer that my job as a journalist, as a reporter, is to ask questions first and foremost, and with a real curious mind, not with a mind that has preconceived notions, preconceived ideas, but with a mind that says, I want to understand everything. And then hopefully be able to convey that to the news consuming public, not be telling them what to think or how to think, but in some way trying to help them understand better what is always a complex situation, a complex individual, a complex movement, a complex country. So that's kind of who I am in a nutshell.
So Kathy, take me back to Canada. Little Kathy growing up in Canada. How was the environment in Canada back then? I mean, both at home, but as a country in itself. Yeah. It's many years ago. I grew up in Timmins, Ontario.
and it's in northern Ontario. It's a gold mining town, and we have several mines now, copper and zinc. But it was the largest gold mining town in Canada. My father was worked in the mine. My brothers worked in the mine. I worked in the mine for summer jobs. My father and mother came from southern Ontario, from Ottawa. And my father is an Irish immigrant, as is my mother, my mother's family. My father started off very poor. My father couldn't read or write, came to northern Ontario to get a job as a policeman. We have, there were 6 of us in our family. We had 4 boys and 2 girls, and the boys came first, and my mother said my father always wanted to have a girl. Then my father worked in the mine. He taught himself to read and write. He had tremendous respect for people. He said, you only have 2 things to worry about, is that you respect people and that you be respected. And so he was very proud of being the person he was, and my mother as well. My mother was a teacher. She had studied, which was unusual at that time to be a teacher, and my father was just so committed to honesty that when I worked in the mine on the surface during the summer when I was going to university, I took a little package of pens home. Because it was in the office. It was just a package of ballpoint pens. And I got home and I was doing something, and my dad said, so where did you get those? I said, I got it from the mine site. I took it. He said, did they give it to you? I said, no. I said, we get all these supplies. And he made me go back the next day, not just put it back, but I had to go to the person in charge and say, I'm so sorry I took these. And so now here I am. I'm 17, 18 years old, and everybody took pens and supplies from the office. But anyway, so he was really he said, if you don't have your honesty and your trust, what do you have? And your respect all tied together. So I grew up in a very, northern mining town community. We grew up thinking that this is like everybody grows up everywhere. I mean, -40 was normal, and you walked to school, you did what you were supposed to do, and I always wanted to, I guess. I used to think about traveling, not a whole lot, but for me, traveling could have been just as far as North Bay, which was 250 miles south. For me, that was like going down to Ottawa or Toronto. I thought, might as well be going to another country. So I grew up in that environment. I have older brothers that were in the newspaper business, and my oldest, who was extraordinarily smart, I always thought I'll never become a reporter because I could never match his intelligence. So anyway, I went to school and I studied first. I did a general arts and studied anthropology, and I thought, that'll be really interesting. Anyway, and then I sort of wandered a little bit and ended up anyway in journalism, and then I got my first job at the Timmins Daily Press, and then I just decided that I worked there for 3 years, and then I thought, I want to go overseas, but I want to know my own country first. And I also want to hone my skills. I mean, who am I to say, I'm going to take limited knowledge and go and cover somebody else's country or some other area. So I worked across Canada. I worked in Ontario, Northern Ontario. I worked in Saskatchewan. I worked in British Columbia. I was a city editor there. I worked in Alberta. And then I sold everything and moved overseas. I have lived in a number of places. I lived in Israel for a couple of years. I lived in Japan, and I lived in Pakistan. Pakistan, of course, has been the longest that I've lived. I arrived here in 1985, I'm going to say, and was going into Afghanistan when the Soviets were still there and before the Stingers. So I've been traveling. I've been here for a long time.
And so, Kathy, is journalism something you wanted to do growing up?
Not really. I mean, like I said, I actually actively was not thinking about doing journalism, but it just the course then what I was taking, it just kind of I was relatively good at writing. It was suddenly it had this interest for me in school, and then I got this first job at a newspaper, having studied journalism in Northern Ontario, and then I just stayed with it, and then it got me. It was a vehicle with which I could use to travel. I went to other newspapers at other parts of the country, and then that got me to another newspaper and another newspaper, and then I really wasn't trained to do anything else. So I thought, okay, journalism it is, and so yeah.
And so then Kathy lands in Israel. How's that? How were things back then?
Well, it was a long time ago, and I really wanted to go, and I was freelancing.
Also, just to understand, why did you choose
Israel?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the idea was also to come here. I was traveling at the time with a photographer, Canadian photographer, who had been actually to Peshawar and had taken some images of refugees and beautiful images. So the idea was also to come here, but was where to go. And growing up, I read all this stuff about kibbutzes and that community living and sort of a product. I'm more a product of the 70s, but also that all kind of hippie movement, not hippie because that's one, but that communal and blah. Anyway, so we went to Israel and as freelancers, and we went and we lived in Haifa, and because I wanted to do some stories on South Lebanon, because that was sort of the thing at the time. Our mistake in going to Israel wasn't that it was Israel, because we had, we did some great stories. But everybody had their people there. So as a freelancer, not a lot of people were looking for freelance material because it was a big story, and especially in North America and Europe, it was quite a big story. I've never been overseas at all. I've never done any international reporting. So I didn't know. And so we got there, and yes, we got a few stories done and some nice pictures, and but we really had difficulty making money. So then we were planning on coming anyway to Pakistan. And I mean, I come from northern Canada. I wasn't aware of all you can't go direct from Israel to Pakistan. This is, so, and I don't get mixed up in any of this, I mean, politics I understand, of course, but I was very young and hadn't done enough research or understand recognition, not recognition. Anyway, so what we did then, when we realized, we drove to Egypt. Took a bus to Egypt, to Cairo, and spent some time in Egypt, and then went from Cairo to Pakistan, and very young and without a whole lot of money, and so lived in Peshawar. Actually,
as your first,
yes, and because the Afghan story. Now, didn't make a lot of money, so I had some friends, and so now by this time I had some friends in Japan, and so maybe it was about early 85 we were here just for a month in northern Pakistan, and then we went to Japan. We had some friends in Japan. And we needed to make money, so I moved to Japan for a year not quite a year, maybe or a year, a little bit more. Anyway, teaching English to earn money. And so earned some money, did that, and then came back to Pakistan because the Afghan war and the Soviets, and I really liked it. And so was in Peshawar for a year, lived in Peshawar for a year, doing freelance. And then also AP hired me as a stringer in Peshawar. And so I thought, great, now I had some money actually coming in. And I think it was like 5,000 rupees a month, which seemed to work fine. And then the number 2 person at AP decided to leave. It was a woman. And this was in 1988. And by this time, I'd been into Afghanistan several times with Hezb Islami, with Hekmatyar, with had been down into Kandahar with Gailani's people because they were strong down there, and with Abdul Qadir as well. But anyway, and so came down here. It was 1988 to Islamabad, and I got here in beginning of August in '88. Well, Zia died in '88. Benazir came to power, and I met my future husband, and one thing led to another, and I've been here ever since.
Amazing, Kathy. So you're part Pakistani at this point.
Yes, thank you very much.
No, but you then also mentioned right now that you covered the Soviet war in Afghanistan.
I did.
How were things in Afghanistan back then? So you kind of saw how things were before that, during that, and after that. Run me through that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting because I was actually, the first time I went to Afghanistan was before the Stingers, because the U.S. supplied Stingers to the Mujahideen. And then that really turned the war around because the planes had to stay 22, I think it was 22,000 or whatever feet, so that they could avoid missiles. Before that, though, I was very dangerous in terms of helicopter gunships coming in low, landmines everywhere. I think the story then was this David versus Goliath, and the Russians being the Goliath, and Mujahideen being these heroes, and really the West and the United States, because it was Ronald Reagan at the time, really played them up as these freedom fighters, and were very glorified. They were glorified as freedom fighters and the godless communists. And the book I did, I is for Infidel, it tells of the, I think it's the University of Nebraska, I want to say, that had the program for teaching Afghan refugees at that time English. And it was I is for infidel, the godless communist. J is for jihad, to fight the infidel, the godless communist. And K is for Kalashnikov, to use in your fight against the godless communists. And then they would have math questions like, if you have 10 communists and you kill 5 communists, how many communists do you have left? And this was a program in Peshawar to teach Afghan refugees about both English and math. So I think for me, having lived and been in Afghanistan and Pakistan through that whole trajectory from the Soviets being in Afghanistan to them leaving, Najibullah staying on until 1992, when everyone thought he would collapse immediately after 89, but he lasted for 3 years. Eventually left in 92. The Mujahideen came in 92 to 96, and really the evidence was always there that they weren't going to get along. I mean, they didn't get along when they were fighting the Soviets, but they were united against the Soviets, the Mujahideen groups. So then they came into Afghanistan in 92, brought, with Pakistan and with the United States and everybody's help. Even the government was formed in Peshawar, and then transferred into Afghanistan, which of course fell apart right away. And what was really for Afghans so disheartening was between 92 and 96, the level of brutality in terms of these Mujahideen groups fighting each other. And there were no good guys. And I think this, with the leadership in Afghanistan, is has been very consistent. There have been no real good guys that have had Afghans and the value of the Afghans at heart. Nor have there been invaders, whether Russians or Americans or NATO, that have been there because of Afghans and their prosperity and their well-being, to be very clear. So between 92 and 96, that they were fighting each other, and Ahmed Shah Massoud was right there, and Rabbani, those who were later embraced by the West 2001 to get rid of the Taliban, had turned Kabul into a war zone. I mean, there were front lines, and 50,000 people died. They planted landmines everywhere. Saif, who was a leading figure during the U.S.-backed government, a leading figure, was close to Al Qaeda. Had I mean, talk about regressive attitude toward women. Also, he was vicious towards Shias. He was a very anti-Shia person during that time, and along with Massoud, carried out it's called the Afshar massacre in Kabul, where they literally shot Shias as they came out their doors from, so. And then the Taliban came in response to that. People say, with Pakistan's help, no doubt. I mean, although at the time, the beginning of the Taliban, from all my research and that, is, first of all, the Taliban were former mujahideen who had fought the Soviets, gone home. And then they came back, and a lot of them are still alive. The same people who actually fought the mujahideen, fought the Russians, are still, some of them are in Kabul today. But so the Taliban, when they first came, and even Hamid Karzai, who was later picked up by the Americans, supported the Taliban. I remember having conversations with Hamid Karzai back in 95 and 94, before the Taliban came. He said, "No, Kathy, you don't understand. The tribal leaders are too weak. There's such chaos. There's all this fighting," which there was. It was, the Mujahideen leaders had literally divided the country into little fiefdoms, stealing everything from anyone they could. We had our sat phones stolen 3 times from them, Hizb Islami Hekmatyar mostly. But anyway, and so they promised some stability. And I remember there were rockets falling all the time in Kabul. And when the Taliban came, even the women said, "We don't care, we just want peace." Of course, when you have peace, for an extended period of time. So for when the Taliban first came, a lot of people thought, they're from Kandahar, they'll bring the king. Well, they didn't bring the king, obviously. And also then they hung Najibullah. And the second day they were there. So that really, because the Americans were actually on their way into Kabul in 96 to meet them. And then they found Najibullah and his brother hung in the town square. Horrible, of course. But when Najibullah was in power and the Mujahideen were fighting them, when the U.S. and Pakistan was backing them during the 80s and fighting Najibullah, they were fighting to kill Najibullah. Najibullah was the head of the Jihad security. He was responsible for scorched earth policy in Afghanistan. So when the U.S. and Pakistan and the Mujahideen were fighting Najibullah, it was okay, they all wanted him dead. Then the Taliban came in after, and Najibullah had been for 5 years in the UN guest house. And he refused to leave with the Northern Alliance when they left, when Massoud left and the Taliban came. Too much detail, I know, Abdullah, but anyway. And then the Taliban found him and hung and killed him. Absolutely wrong. The people who found him were former Mujahideen, now Taliban. They had lost 5 members of their family to Jihad, had been picked up, tortured, and died when Najibullah was head of Jihad. Now, that doesn't in any way say that it's okay to then kill Najibullah when you get him. I'm just saying that there's a lot of context and that doesn't say it's right. It just says, here's what was part of the story as well. When he died. Anyway, long story short, Taliban turned into being really repressive, let's face it. And it was safe. But like one person once said to me, of course it's safe, but it's like being in a prison. Do you want to be in a prison? Yeah. So, and their attitude toward women, and it wasn't across the board. There were lots of Taliban within the council who wanted to educate women and said, but within their beliefs and of how it should be done, segregated, hijab, everything, but not stopping them from education. So the belief that the Taliban is a monolith first, and the second is committed to not educating girls is also not right, because it's that's not the case. there are those who do want to, and it became political. And like everything, it becomes politicized, and everybody championing for women are really championing for their own interests, to be clear. But anyway, long story short, then 2001, and during that whole time when the Taliban were there, nobody was really there. I was for most of it.
So Kathy, before we get to 2001, because I want to talk about that, of course, how was that during the 90s for you as a white woman covering Afghanistan and Pakistan and the wider region? I mean, what are some of the difficulties that you were facing on a personal level?
Also a good question, Abdullah. Also one that I get asked a lot. And it's not, of course there are difficulties. You're going into an environment that is not your own, that you don't really know. So it's a learning curve. For me, it was a learning curve. I'm respectful. But I'm also very strong. And initially, when I was first there in the 90s, I traveled everywhere. Not that I'm not afraid of things, because of course I am, but I went to the front lines. I was where they were. I was talking to them in the places where they lived, where they fought. I went to the front line of where the Taliban were, and I went to the front line of where the Northern Alliance was, depending on who was in power. I met with everybody. I'm a little bit hardline, just like they all can be. The Chief Justice at the time when the Taliban were in power, for example, they said I was there with a photographer, AP photographer, and so they said, okay, we'll talk to the photographer. He was a man. We'll talk. I said, I'm sorry. No, I'm the writer, and he's so sorry, And they said, well, and I said, whatever. I mean, I had the scarf on my head, and that, no problem. No obligation to wear a burqa. And I said, someone said once, just there's a lot of older people here where, I said, no. I said, you say it's, you shouldn't pose as a Muslim. That's wrong. I said, well, I'm not. I am who I am, and here's, but of course I'm respectful. I also made an effort to understand the religion, and understand the environment, and understand who I was talking to, and people are people like anybody, I mean, and so I waited for 6 hours to finally talk to this Chief Justice, Saqib, who's now very hardline as well still. But anyway, Saqib, and finally after 6 hours, because at the end of the day, Afghans are very hospitable, as are Pakistanis, and he was now ashamed that I had sat there for 6 hours outside the door, and so felt that he had to at least say, to not be totally. So anyway, so I'll just finish the story. So long story short, the Chief Justice saw me. And for me, I've always been true to myself and true to the environment that I live in, and been very grateful that people have opened their doors and want to talk to me. But I'm also, we see people as people, I mean, I knew they had this thing with, I would go to the Taliban front lines, and I'd have conversations and say things like, because they want to talk. They're not, I mean, I have an advantage as a white Western woman. They don't see me as much as a woman sometimes, and so that kind of gives them a little bit more freedom, I guess, as opposed to feeling that if it was an Afghan woman, perhaps they would say, feel the need to impose expectations. So I had that, but also have conversations, and I would say to these young lads, I'd say, but the Prophet had just one child who really survived, and that was a girl, after everything. It was just, and he must have just loved girls so much. And one guy says, he said, oh, that can't be right. He says, we put our girls in the corner. I said, I know, but really. And so, you could have these conversations, and I'd always, when I'd be out in the villages and that, and somebody would say, yeah, I've got 4 boys and 1 girl. I'd say, oh, I'm so sorry, only 1 girl. No, that's too bad, or somebody. And then they'd laugh, because it's not like they don't understand. But it's it's not disrespect, because they understand as well. And you have conversations with people who are people. It's not. Anyway, so that's sort of and so, yes, of course, I had times, where when the Taliban first came in 1996, Rabbani, who was the prime minister, he didn't want to see me. So I said, fine, I'm Amr Shah, my colleague. I said, Amr Shah, you go talk to him, and here's what I would like to ask, and you ask whatever. Amr Shah knew. Amr Shah, who had such a pure heart, he was our correspondent in Kabul, and extraordinary human being, and still is, but just so pure. He taught himself Pashto, but anyway, and because he's Hazara, and so also Shia, but everybody loved him, and he loves everybody. And so he went, he got the information, and then they had a press conference, the foreign ministry, and they said, if you go, you have to wear a burqa. I said, well, I'm not going to, I'll wear a scarf. And so I didn't go. I do draw the line, because I also know that a burqa is not a requirement, and so then later Mullah Rabbani said to somebody, why wasn't Kathy there? Or maybe it was Mutawakil, who was the foreign minister. Why wasn't Kathy there? And they said, we said you have to wear a burqa. He said she didn't have to wear a burqa. She could have sat at the back with a scarf. So you just sort of you do little things that sort of make you feel okay and comfortable. I used to have this argument with this one Taliban all the time, and finally he says, we call people like you, or we call someone like you. And I said, no, what? He said, a man. So I said to him, not a compliment. And and I'd sit in the front seat, and the Taliban everyone would always say, you're not supposed to. And I'd say, tell me, where does Mullah Omar say that I cannot sit in the front seat? Oh, I don't know. So we don't have to. We should talk to people like we talk to anybody. Understanding that but Afghans have a wonderful sense of humor. Wonderful sense of humor, and it doesn't matter. And they love music. I know they love music, even though the Taliban ban it. And so. You have to separate leadership and politics from people and culture. And culture is not just what you can't do. Culture is a lot of the music, the expression, the lifestyle, the hospitality, the heart. That's culture, and that doesn't mean that I didn't have run-ins with people and I didn't get kicked out of, asked to leave, because I have been asked to leave many places. But for the most part, I'm spending more time in places with, whether it's the foot soldiers, whether it's ordinary individuals, whether it's in the houses, whether it's, as opposed to sitting in offices waiting to see, Mullah Omar. We went to see, one time we went to see with Taliban down in Kandahar with this friend of mine, a woman too. And so the guard came and he said, I'm really sorry, he won't look at women. And she said, that's okay, tell him to keep his eyes closed. They didn't end up seeing us. But so, we didn't take offense, or or feel that you work around where you can. That's my job. My job's not supposed to be easy as a journalist. Everybody's not supposed to say, well, yeah, welcome, Kathy, we'd love to talk to you. A lot of people don't want to talk to me, but my job is to try to understand the best I can. That's my job. And that's trying, yes, but my job is also understanding people, so that then, and if I'm always seeing Afghans or Taliban as these, it's like I said to somebody once that I did a paper. I said, if you see everybody with a turban and a beard, and you right away, your mind goes to, oh, look at that, they don't educate girls. Look at that, they're this. So we look at, but you can't ask questions. You can't hear what they say. You can ask a question, but you don't really hear them. You might be listening, but you're not hearing, because in your mind you're thinking, geez, you're horrible. Imagine not educating. and now you're not even trying to understand what they may be thinking and asking them about, where this comes from and how. And suddenly you realize that maybe they're not thinking the same thing, and maybe their ideas are much different, and maybe and then now you understand the nuance of a people, of a country, of a thought process. But if you go with this idea that, well, that's just horrible and you're horrible, and I'm going to tell the world that this is, then you're not really understanding or trying to. You're just trying to.
But, Kathy, did you always have this sort of empathetic nature to, sort of getting down to people's level and understanding them as they are? Or did it develop over time?
I think empathy was a big part of growing up. My parents were very empathetic to people. People were always coming to our house, and it wasn't like it was a skill to be empathetic.
Because it is interesting to, come from Canada and then to really try and understand without all that bias and those nuances and all of that, to really get down to, seeing beyond that fit and that beard and that turban.
Yeah, well, for sure, but we should be learning that. That should be part of our growing up. I mean, in Canada, I did a lot of stories on the First Nation, and I really wanted to understand about. They had all kinds of traditions and that it worked to try to assist in generational deprivation that the First Nation in Canada has suffered, and they had all these really interesting ways of trying to help the next generation to make it deal with some of the problems of alcohol and that have beset so many because of generational deprivation. So I don't think it just came with coming to this part of the world or leaving Canada. I think wherever I worked, I'm different communities. The Mormon community in southern Alberta, I used to go and try to understand what it was all about, and because there's a very large community there. So I don't know. I think part of being a journalist, part of being a human, first off, is there should be that sense of empathy regardless. Not that I'm always empathetic, because, everybody gets frustrated, everybody gets, and you feel really strongly about something, and then you realize that you've said it too strongly, and that's just hurt somebody who feels very strongly another way, especially in today's crazy world. But it should be something that we learn in journalism, if you don't already have it. And I taught in Canada for this. I was in Canada from January to May teaching a semester at the University of Western Ontario, journalism course. It was a fellowship that I was doing. And the one thing I really tried to emphasize, and I gave that example of the turban and the beard, and I said this whole need or the real work that we do as journalists is to try to understand. That's the work we do. That's our job.
So, Kathy, I also want to understand, during the 90s when you were covering, you covered the Soviet War, you covered the Civil War, you spoke to a lot of people, a lot of scary people, or scary-looking people. Were you ever scared for your own safety during those initial years of your covering the region?
I think when first went into Afghanistan, the Russians were there, Najib was there. It was with the Mujahideen, so whether Hizb Islami. So you're walking for like days, and you're in the mountains, and when we were hiding from helicopter gunships at one point, and they came in so low, or we were hiding up in the mountains at one point, and this Russian bomber came in so low you could see the pilot, and so of course I was afraid, and walking for days. again, you have to earn people's respect. You have to earn, so you have to be able to. At that time, different circumstances require different behavior. I had to walk and be strong and not, lag behind, and not that you didn't show your fear, because they were afraid too if people were bombing. This was before the stingers, and I remember the hills were on fire with napalm at that time. It was very scary, and you were traveling in small groups and at night, and but you're with other people, and you look at make sure, okay, how afraid are they? Okay, they're not about to jump off the mountain, so we're good. I mean, there's all kinds of things you do, and I really forced myself to keep walking, and so it got around among, she's very strong.
But was there a point where you kind of just felt like, okay, like I wanna give up and just go back and go to a comfortable life? And
No, because my life was also comfortable when I was not there, and I had nice friends. It's not uncomfortable living in this part of the world.
No, I meant being in the mountains.
Oh, being in the mountains. After 2-3 weeks, I was happy to get back to Peshawar.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, but I mean, I was there for a reason, to do something, and so that was to get to a certain place, to see a certain operation. So that was what I was doing. For sure, there were times, I went, and after 3 weeks, I remember we climbed like 5 mountain peaks to get outside of Kabul with the Mujahideen in '89. And by the time I got back, I had new boots on, so I had blisters. I couldn't take my boots off because my feet were so swollen, so I had to leave them on for like the last 2 weeks. And and so by the time I got back to Peshawar, I was like, what a relief. But you do what you have to do, and I have to say, as a woman, often I traveled with male colleagues, journalists, foreigners, journalists. 9 out of 10 times, the men were either, I've got to be on a donkey. This is really hard. I don't know, if I just could, I'll just sit on this for just a little while. I'll be okay. Another one, he sprained his ankle, Oh, it's just it's so hard. And I'm not trying to say it was, but, I man or woman, I'm not suggesting, but certainly I didn't, and when Anya and I traveled, later, many years later, there was certainly a lot less complaining than if you were traveling with some of your male colleagues.
And so, Kathy, amidst all of this, then 9/11 happens. And then I read that, everyone's kind of sent out of the country, all foreign journalists, and, there's no one in Afghanistan. And then a few days later, you're the only person in the country, the only foreign journalist covering Afghanistan. How was that?
I was so grateful, I have to tell you. I was so grateful. I was so desperate to get back to Afghanistan. I mean, I was just so desperate. So I was very grateful when it was the information minister, Qadratullah Jamal, who gave permission, and then got permission from the Mullah Hassan, and allowed me to come back in. It took a couple of days as the word got to the one in Jalalabad, and that. It was very important for me because, and first, the Al Jazeera correspondent was there. He had never left. They had allowed the Al Jazeera correspondent, and he did some great work. He really did. He did some great work, and the Americans bombed the Al Jazeera office on November the 12th. He managed to use Spanish. I think he's Lebanese, but Spanish national now. Anyway, we got into trouble, blah. Anyway, but so I was very grateful because I wanted to be able to tell the story of, and we had Amr Shah was there. So to say we didn't have anybody, we had Amr Shah who was there for Associated Press, who was extraordinary, is extraordinary. And he would be always getting information from people and feeding it to me because I was the only one who could get all the details from him and understand well what he was saying. So together we would do it. He would feed it to me. But then, I wanted to go to be there, to be able to feel what it was like, to be able to understand what it was like, you know, for people, on that side, because everybody was with the U.S.-led coalition, everybody was with the Northern Alliance, everybody was, and I wanted to be there to understand what it was like it was still a city of, you know, 1 million people then, you know, and so I wanted to, so I was hugely grateful. How was it? It was very scary because they were bombing. The night before, the Taliban fled. They dropped 2,000-pound bomb on the house behind us, which destroyed half of our house and sent me flying across. And then we got... but you know, through it all, we had a basement, and Abdullah, our driver, stayed behind there was a family of a woman in a burqa and 3 or 4 kids running through the dark and the dust and everything. And nicely, Abdullah took them in. We took them in, and they stayed in the basement, and he stayed with them, and we went up toward the Intercon. Because we didn't know where the bombings were coming. The area where we were was a lot of Arabs in that area. So we got up to the Intercon, and at that point, 3 days before the Beeb had arrived, so we went back, we got them, and then together we all went up there, and then the Taliban left the next week.
And so when the Americans eventually came in and stepped in, what did the average Afghan feel at that point?
Elated. They were thrilled. Absolutely, they were thrilled. I mean, you know, it's Afghans have hope every single time a new ruler comes in. They had hope when the Mujahideen came in 92. They had hope when the Taliban came in 96. They had tremendous hope. They really had hope in 2001. They thought the world is here. Because I remember when I went back, and during the bombing, and I went down to Chicken Street, which is downtown Kabul, and I went in, and because I knew some of the people, I went in to say salam and have a cup of tea, and they said, "Oh, are the foreigners back?" "Not yet," I said, "but they're coming." And so people were elated, and it's not that Afghans, you know, this whole thing, you know, every empire has been defeated by the Afghans, and that all these empires come to dominate and to fight them. That's what the problem is. The Afghans are more than happy to have you there. They just don't want you fighting them, because once you do that, then they'll fight you back. So so everybody was elated. They were thrilled. Okay, and then the world is here. Oh, Afghanistan's going to really, it's going to be great. You don't understand, Kathy. It's going to be so good. And then, you know, after 20 years, they were so disappointed. So, because it wasn't very good.
So before we come to the 20-year mark when the Americans did leave, I also see that you were in Pakistan during the time when Benazir got assassinated. How was that? Because you saw that all unfold very closely.
Horribly, yeah. Yeah, it was horrible. And, you know, Benazir came back, and I think she really believed that the time was right for a real change in Pakistan. I think she really felt that way, and she really, Benazir was tireless, I have to say. I don't, you know, her politics, or, you know, or any you can get into politics, but she was tireless in terms of her campaigning and her desire to change things, and, you know.
Did you get to speak to her at that time?
At that time, I didn't interview her that time when she was here. I've interviewed her several times and many times over the years, and traveled with her. At that time, I didn't. And at that time, there was a lot of problems with the TTP and operations against them, the military going into the tribal areas, and so there was a real issue with all of that, and so I think. And also in the politics, it was also in quite a turmoil. Pakistan's politics at the time with Musharraf, and, you know, and so there was always this sort of and I think there was fear. There's certainly the fear that something would happen. Something had happened. There had been the explosion, and there were a lot of explosions at that time. Not always just directed at the politicians, but it was happening around the country. And you had the Taliban up in Swat, and I mean it was a really very difficult time. Security-wise, but Benazir was really, she was undaunted. She was going out, and it's not really, and I really think to this day in terms of the reality behind her death. If somebody asked me up front, who do you think killed Benazir? I'm not sure. And I think, there's certainly a lot of speculation and conspiracy theories and the TTP, this one, that one. And I think that's probably for a lot of people is often the uncertainty around these things too, of course the loss, but it never seems to get settled, the accountability for who might be responsible in the investigation into that. So, and it was, on a personal note, it was a difficult time because my mother passed away the same day that Benazir died. And so I was here, and then I was flying back to Canada the next day. So I have met Bilal several times, and one time I said to him, I was writing her story of her death, just having heard that my mom had passed away. So it was, for me, it was a very personal kind of thing as well. And I left the next day after that for Canada. So it was a very tumultuous time.
And Kathy, then happens 2014. You're back in Afghanistan. 2007, 2008, the elections are happening in Pakistan, but then we shift our focus to the 2014 elections in Afghanistan. You're there to cover them on ground. You're moving around the country to kind of like see things as they are. How is that?
For me, it was really during that time, like 2007, 8, 9. I was doing a lot of traveling. I was in South Lebanon for the war in 2006 against Israel, and I was in Central Asia a lot. I was doing the 2 coups in Kyrgyzstan. I was there for that and stuff. So I was doing a lot of traveling in the area. Middle East, I was up in Kirkuk and that in northern Iraq during that time too. So, and then I was back in Afghanistan pretty much from 2009 onwards, I guess. And Anya and I, my friend Anya, who was a photographer, AP photographer, brilliant, won a Pulitzer, everything. And we were doing a lot of traveling. Our stories, we were doing larger look stories, so I wasn't doing any administration or anything. I was just doing, and we were doing these packages, big stories and everything. Wonderful stories. So this was the election. Karzai wasn't running again because he had served the 2 terms, which was according to the Constitution. It was Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah. And so we were in host because Anya really wanted to go. We'd been down to Kandahar, done a lot of traveling. And at that point, people weren't really traveling, but we were traveling, and we had done an embed with the Afghan army. And people always said, you guys are always going, it's so dangerous. But we were very careful. We were always very, very careful. Anyway, Anya really wanted to go to the east, to host. She had never been there. I knew the governor from back in the Mujahideen times. He was with Gailani's person. And anyway, so I got in touch and I said, what's it like? Can we come? And we had done some checks with the UN, and the UN had been there 2 weeks before. And Kabul was actually at that time during that election. I think it was a Danish journalist was killed in Kabul. There was an attack on the Kabul, the Serena Hotel in Kabul. So it was quite dangerous in Kabul. And I remember the night before we left for host, the U.S. Institute of Peace person, I met with him for coffee, and he said, you host, we just had some people there checking on the election and everything. The UN drove back. He said, you're probably going to it's probably safer there than it is in Kabul, going to host. So anyway, and we were supposed to fly. We couldn't. And so I said to Anya, let's just go to Kandahar then. She said, oh, we've gone every time. Let's go to, I've never been. So anyway, I convinced the office that we could drive. And in fact, it was safe to drive. And it was, because the UN had been there. Anyway, long story short, we got there. We stayed at the governor's in the compound. It was very secure. Got ourselves all set up. And then we went to the election headquarters. These stories, the next day they were going to drop ballot boxes to the remote areas. It was the day before the election. And so we made arrangements to go with them out about 35 minutes outside of the city of Khost toward a place called Tanai, much closer toward the Pakistan border, that area. And we made arrangements to go with them. So we were with them at the time.
And then during that trip, something major happened.
Yeah, certainly was major. We got to a police compound. It was a huge compound where we drove in, and Anya and and there were all these police that were being given ballot boxes, and then they were going to distribute them to these different areas. And we were in the compound. There was trucks. It was a really big compound, and it was a police compound. So we talked to all the police, and we had done I'd done all my interviews. Anya had done all her pictures, and the last thing we were talking to some of the police, and they had a little first aid kit, and I said to Anya after, and she was taking pictures, and it had like a little bit of gauze and some bandages, and I said, you sure hope nothing happened to them, because they don't have much equipment to do anything. And then we got into the car because it was starting to rain, and so Anya and I were sitting in the back seat, and she was sitting right beside me because she had put her cameras over on the seat beside her to the left. And our driver, who was also our television person, Nishan, he was in the car with us, and we were talking about what are we going to do, and we were supposed to go then to this nearby village to drop off the boxes. It was just a 15-minute drive, so we were going to go there, and then but now it's 9 o'clock because we had left like at 6 in the morning or something. And so I had some chocolate. So I said to Nishan, could you please give it to Rafiullah, who was our translator? And Rafiullah was always somewhere else talking to somebody. And so he got out of the car and went over to Rafiullah, and it was just Anya and I in the back seat. And a police commander, I found out later, went to a policeman on one of the nearby trucks, and he said, give me your Kalashnikov. And apparently the guy said, why? And he said, hey, I'm your commander, you give it to me. So he gave him his Kalashnikov. And our driver, who was now far from the car, he said, all I heard was the cocking of the gun. And then the police commander emptied his AK-47 into Anya and I. And I remember the last of the bullets hitting. I was hit with 7 bullets. My hand was almost off. I remember looking down, and I couldn't quite see it at first, and I just saw this. And then I felt the last of the bullets, and at first I thought it was an explosion that happened near. And then I felt the impact, and then I could smell the sulfur because he was so close. It was at such close range. And then I just remember seeing in the distance Rafiullah and saying, please help me. And I guess they said later that they thought maybe it was going to be a suicide bomb or something come after, and so they all ran toward the gate of the compound because they didn't know what was. And I guess they thought we were both gone, Anya and I. I didn't know Anya was gone at the time. And I just remember saying, please, and then Nishan said, somebody said, oh my God, they're alive. And so he got in the car, and I heard a siren, and Anya was right by my left side, and she was leaning hard against me, but she hadn't fallen over, and I could see Anya had gray hair, and but I couldn't move my body because my hand was almost gone, and I had lots of blood, and I was shot in the back here, and so I couldn't move, and I was trying to see out of the corner of my eye, and she was upright, so I didn't know. I thought maybe she was like me, just trying to, and I remember I was just trying to breathe, and I just kept breathing and thinking, I just don't want to go afraid. I want to go peaceful. I just want to, I wanted to be peaceful. I wanted to be peaceful. And that was sort of all I kind of remember from there to getting to the hospital in Host. And Rafiula later said the only way we knew that you weren't dead was that every once in a while we heard ouch. I guess because it was quite a bumpy road. I don't remember that. And then we got to the hospital. We were it seemed like suddenly at the hospital, and they took me out on one side and Anya on the other side. I didn't know that Anya had died at that point. And this Afghan doctor, he came, and they wheeled me into the foyer at the beginning, and anyway, he said, I just have to see, and I'd lost a lot of blood and everything. He said, I have to operate to stop the bleeding. I have to do something. And he was just talking really gently, and he had to take an x-ray because the bullets had also entered my lungs and shattered my lungs, and the pain by this time was excruciating. And so he just said, and we're going into the operating theater, and all I remember is he just said to me, I just want you to know that your life is as important to me as it is to you. And he was trying to make me feel better, which I have to say it did. And then we were and I just remember in the operating theater, this old Pashtun guy with a white beard, and he's trying to intubate me, but I'm still awake, you do it after, but he's trying to, and I'm choking because he's shoving it down my throat, and I could see the frustration on his face, like, oh God, what is she doing, And so then I heard the doctor say in Pashto to put the mask on my face, and so he put and then I don't remember anything, and he saved my arm, really. He used duct tape and wood to hold it together until I got to the Americans. Then a very close friend of mine, Jennifer Griffin, she also got in touch with the Americans, and Hamid Karzai, because Amr Shah in Kabul had gotten in touch with Hamid Karzai, who was still in the presidential palace. He called Danford, I think his name was, the head of the U.S. forces. And so the ambulance took Anya and I to Camp Chapman, which is a forward operating base outside of Host, because they had an agreement with the Afghans. They wouldn't come into Host. Anyway, long story short, they medevaced us. And Dunford was in touch with my husband, with Pasha in Islamabad, because Jen, my friend, had given him Pasha's cell number, and he said, we're medevacing her to Kabul. And then he called again, he says, she's in Kabul now, but we had to sedate her again because she wouldn't leave the aircraft without Anya. And I guess, I don't really remember, but I guess Anya and I were both on in the stretcher in the aircraft and the helicopter, and I wouldn't leave without her. I have kind of a vague recollection. Anyway, they operated twice in Kabul because they had to hold my hand on with an external thing, and also my right hand, they had to hold on part of that. And then I was medevaced to, and I found out then that Anya had died. And then they medevaced me to Germany, and then from Germany, all my family came, and Pasha and my stepdaughter, everybody came to Germany, my brothers, my sister. And then they medevaced me to New York, where the hospital for special surgeries. So I've had 20 surgeries since then for different things. And Anya, but she was fierce, and she was. I learned so much from her, because she always wanted to be where the people were, going and getting their images. And she always said, one thing she said when she won the Courage in Journalism Award, and she said, I take pictures with my camera and with my heart to show the courage of others. And so she really was, and it was because of her I went back to Afghanistan, of course, within a year and a half, because Anya would have been crazy.
A year and a half later, you were back in Afghanistan.
Yeah. I mean, I just went for a weekend just because I had to go back. And because first Anya would have been crazy if I would have, let some gunman decide what my life was going to be. And also I didn't want to be hostage to my fear, And I was only there for a weekend the first time I went back. because I had to go back for more operations. And then I 2 years later, I guess, I went back full time. But I wanted to go back first just to make sure that I didn't look at Afghans differently. You know, I wasn't talking to you and thinking, is that going to get him upset? Is he going to, you know, does he have a gun? Is he going to, you know, am I afraid? Or am I looking at you the way I look before, you know, and what do you have to say? You know, how interesting, you know, wondering about your brother, your sister, you know, am I...
Were you a bit remorseful?
Remorseful that it happened? No. I mean, I hope you're remorseful, yes. I mean, I didn't want it to happen, but did I feel guilty? No. I mean, we did everything we possibly could have. Anya and I were not cavalier about it, and we took the precautions. We were with, it was a police commander who did it. We were with the police compound. We were with the Afghan National Army. We were with the police. The deputy head of the provincial police was there. We took every precaution we could have, other than to have stayed back in Kabul. Well, that wasn't something either one of us would have done. And you know, a lot of Afghans called me later, I mean, Hamid, you know, so many Afghans, and said, you know, we're so sorry for what happened to you. You know, it's, we feel so ashamed. And I said, why would you feel ashamed? It's one person, one crazy person doesn't define a nation. You know, my goodness, you know, look at the gunmen running around in America killing people. You know, I mean, one gunman doesn't define, yes, it's a conflict area, but that doesn't define.
And did you start to look at the Taliban a little differently? I understand that a police constable did this, but did you start viewing the Taliban as a group differently then?
No, I mean, no, not really, because first they said right away they didn't do it. You know, I mean, I know the reality of the Taliban, you know, the repressiveness and everything. And would they have done it? Could they have done it? I don't know. They didn't do it, apparently. This police commander did. He went to jail. I mean, he went through the whole court system. And my colleague, Ashraf, who's from the same area that he was from, because he was from a little toward the north in not Bagram, a little north of Kabul, and so, you know, he went to the village, and this guy had been a troublemaker there. You know, who knows what was going on in his head when all this happened. But did I look at the time? No, I mean, I think. And I'm really, you know, I'm being as honest as I can. I mean, I really feel that I took it for what it was a horrible, horrible thing done by a horrible person, and had excruciating results because I lost Anya, and she was extraordinary, and I lost. I have forever injuries. But it's not anybody's fault. I mean, it's the person who did it's fault. It's not my fault for being there. It's not Anya's fault for being there. We did everything we were supposed to do. Why should we be the ones then to people to look at and say, well, what were you doing there? We were there to tell this story of an election, and we took every precaution possible. We were not cavalier. We did not in any way. And so no, I think, and going back to Afghanistan, I really wanted to be sure that I didn't, though. You know, it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to be in the environment. And I'll just tell this one quick story, because I talk a lot. Is we were in Dashti Barchi, a part of Kabul. And this is after 9 back, and we're traveling around, and I'm going to do a story. And one story I did, I was with this woman, and her son had died. And you know, I was so caught up, I'd forgotten all about me, and I was so caught up in her story. And then we were going, and I looked over, and there was this guy, and I saw him, and he had had like a jacket on, a bit tweed, and I thought, now, is he a beggar or is he someone else? And I'm just thinking, boy, it's funny, because he looked like he might be, but he also looked, maybe he's a professor. And I'm thinking, and I'm just thinking all this stuff, nothing, any danger or anything. And Amrshah's behind in the back seat because I always sit in the front. And then he comes over, and sure enough, he's a beggar. And so then we're driving on, and Amrshah says, oh, Kathy John, the first thing I thought is, what if he has a gun? I thought, didn't even occur to me. Did not even occur to me that he might have a gun. I was more interested in the jacket he was wearing. It was kind of tweed, and I'm thinking, gosh, he kind of looks like a professor, but no, maybe he's a beggar. And so it was just the contradiction, And so that's when I realized I was just really interested in people, and so I felt like, no, it's okay, I can. And Taliban, I know the what they are and who they are, and it's like anything, they're not a monolith. There's a lot of gray and there's a lot of black and white, but there's a lot of gray, And
so now that they are back in Kabul, how do you see that? I mean, it's been like 5 years almost now since the fall of Kabul. How are you viewing that as someone that's been there so many times, understood the Taliban, understood how the country works? How does Kathy view that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. In Afghanistan itself, I think it's difficult for women. I think the Taliban are not a monolith. I think there are very differing views. It's very different than from 92 to 96. There's no Mullah Omar that holds everything together and nobody questions. There's a lot of different groups within the Taliban that have different ideas and different strengths and different ideas. It's more secure now than it was before, so people can do things. It's not all black and white, very difficult for women. It's true about education, but a lot of Afghans want to educate their girls. It's a deeply conservative society. The people who were there with the US-backed coalition were corrupt and were warlords and were violent. They had nothing to offer the Afghans. Do the Taliban have anything to offer the Afghans? Very little in terms of governance and how they're governing, for sure. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that because the international community in the West then tends to listen to these people that were there when they were there. And these people who were there when they were there are part of the reason why the Taliban are back. They were ruling the country between 92 and 96. When the Taliban came in 96, they were ruling the country from 2001 to 2021 when the Taliban came back. They are the problem. They are not the solution. The Taliban, there isn't an alternative to them. People don't want more fighting in their country, but they want prosperity. And the only way to figure out how things can go forward in Afghanistan is if Afghans figure out how things can go forward in Afghanistan, but they need an international community that is in Afghanistan, not sitting in Doha, not sitting in Washington or in Beijing they need to be in Afghanistan, not telling Afghans what to do, but trying to learn a little bit and trying to understand where they can where Afghans want their country to go, what can be done to release funds for businesses to grow. There are women that are running businesses in Afghanistan. Is it easy for them? Absolutely not. There are people that are working their heart out to educate girls behind the scenes and that. Afghans don't need anybody to come in and give them the solution, but they do need the world to be there because isolation limits their options and they need options so that they can make the choice. That's my idea. And I'm sticking with it, Abdullah.
Kathy, I have so many questions, but I will just ask you one last question and then let you go. What are you making of the current global geopolitical situation in terms of everything that is going on around the globe? And I don't even know what's going to happen by the time this podcast airs. But what do you think the next few years or the few months even, or I mean, at this point, it looks like the few weeks are looking like for the world?
Yeah. I think the real problem is the polarization, which I think journalists have contributed to. Everything is divided into good, bad, right, wrong, and I think that's a huge problem. The leadership, global leadership, is abysmal. Whether it's American leadership, European Union leadership, NATO leadership, what has been allowed to continue in Gaza by Israel to the Palestinians on a constant basis is criminal for all of us, because we have allowed this to happen for nearly 2 years, people to be killed. They're starved, and then they're shot when they go to get food. For me, this Gaza really is pivotal, because it really has exposed us for what we are. And it's not good, and it's racist, and it's shameful, and it has taken away the value of humanitarian laws and the value of international laws, which means it's a free-for-all. Because if it's okay for you to do it, it's okay for everybody else to do it. So this, for me, is really, it's the poor leadership that we have, and it's beyond poor. I just, is so problematic, and I think Gaza really, and allowing Israel to do this. Yes, of course, Israel has a right to defend itself. Pakistan has a right to defend itself. Canada has a right to defend itself. Absolutely, 100%. No one has the right to wipe out a population. No one has the right to make every civilian pay for the acts of a few, and to starve a population, and for the world to look at it. And still, and it's not just the West, which has been horrible. Where have all the Middle Eastern countries? Where is everybody? Why are they screaming for sanctions against Israel? I mean, this really, for me, has been a real. It's removed this fig leaf of the West being committed to humanitarian rules or international law. A lie, and it's exposed us for the racist people that we are, and it's exposed all of us, frankly. That here you have a population of 2.3 million people, and they're being killed every day. Everything has been bombed by the Israelis. They're denied food, intentionally starved. We all know that. And as a world, it's almost 2 years, Abdullah. 2 years. So for me, Gaza speaks volumes about all of us. And I'm afraid there's no one country or one government that can proudly say they've done anything. You have to credit some of the countries who've broken relations, South Africa, thank you, South Africa, gone to the ICC because they understand apartheid, they understand. But as a world, my goodness, I mean, to watch it for over 2 years, and I think because the West has been so insistent and arrogant in its projection of itself as a protector of human rights and of humanitarian law, is particularly abysmal for allowing this, and hypocritical for allowing this to continue. And then for the EU to have come out and says, well, we're seeing signs that Israel is violating human rights. Really? I mean, it is so disrespectful. It is so disrespectful of every single law that exists, but it's also to allow a people to suffer like this, and to watch it and to excuse it. Anyway, that for me sums up where we are today. where we go tomorrow, given that we've allowed this today and where we are today, I don't know.
This has been wonderful, Kathy. Thank you so much, and thank you for being at Pakistan Observer. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.